We have had 11 pay-per-views in 2025 for the UFC, with still 2 to go. But right now, we are going to rank every single one of those 11 pay-per-views that have occurred so far, because I do believe these last 2 will be the 2 best of the year, not only on paper, but in performance. Now, looking at performance, what are the best ones so far this year? Let's go over all 11 on today's episode of The Matchup. Good morning. Welcome to The Matchup with mmadbm. Appreciate all you guys for being here as per usual. And I wanted to go over these 11 pay-per-views that we had so far in 2025 because we are going into 2 of the best pay-per-views I have seen as an MMA fan. Now, a lot of people are claiming recency bias. You've barely been watching all this. Please, I am begging you to go look at the past that we've had in building up cards and building up main cards. Apart from those like 3 title fight cards that we used to have, you scarcely get the build-up and the bulk of main cards that we get like we have at UFC 322 and UFC 323 in November and December. Hell, the one in November is in less than 2 weeks, literally a week and a half away. I can't wait for that. I cannot wait to see both 322 and 323. But before that, let's go through UFC 311 through UFC 321 to discuss what are the worst and best pay-per-views of the year. We're going to go from worst to best, of course, starting off with UFC 312, Dricus du Plessis versus Sean Strickland as my number 11 worst pay-per-view of the year. And I'm doing main cards only. We're doing main cards only because it's going to be hard to assess the whole thing, and I do want to kind of focus on the pay-per-view portion of it because that's essentially what we're going after here. The worst pay-per-view of the year in terms of main card is UFC 312, Dricus du Plessis versus Sean Strickland 2. You had the main event be as boring as it was with how bad Sean Strickland's performance was against Dricus du Plessis. Zhang Weili versus Tatiana Suarez was an impressive performance from Zhang Weili. Big letdown from Tatiana Suarez, but not really that entertaining. If you look at Talison Teixeira versus Justin Tafa, that fight being on the main card itself, first of all, Teixeira making his UFC debut. Second, Justin Tafa on a UFC pay-per-view. Do I really need to go further into that? That was a featured bout on that card. Teixeira knocked him out in round 1. Great, that's cool. 35-second knockout. Fun. Why is that on the main card? We had a draw between Jimmy Crute and Rodolfo Bellato. And then Jake Matthews versus Francisco Prado opened up the card. Wasn't necessarily the most entertaining fight either. By the way, they had that fight over Jack Jenkins versus Gabriel Santos. They also had the Jimmy Crute fight between him and Rodolfo Bellato over Jack Jenkins versus Gabriel Santos. Tom Nolan versus Slava Klaus was even bad if you want to go to the prelims. But main card itself honestly looked horrible going into it, even with 2 title fights, and very much delivered to be as underwhelming as it was. And the main event, we expect it to be very good because honestly, the first fight between DDP and Strickland was okay. I think we overhyped it, and I think a lot of people started saying it was better than it was. It wasn't, but the second fight, that card, horrible. 312, the worst of the year so far. On to my number 10, UFC 321, Tom Aspinall versus Cyril Gane, the second worst of the year. Literally just happened. Aspinall Gane, main event, heavyweight championship, long awaited, highly anticipated, and Tom Aspinall pulls out with an eye poke. Mind you, horrible heavyweight showcasing on this main card, with the number 1 contender fight essentially being Volkov versus Almeida in a robbery split decision, Volkov winning. Almeida basically wet blanketing the whole fight, which is why he didn't get the win. Virna Jandiroba versus Dern is actually, in my opinion, one of the most entertaining fights on the main card. Quillan Salkeld, insane head kick knockout, but that was in the prelims. Mirzakhanov was honestly the only thing that gave us life on that main card. Umar Bautista was okay, and I think Mackenzie Dern versus Virna Jandiroba was honestly the most complete fight and best fight on this card, apart from just Mirzakhanov taking Rakic's soul with a jab. Main event was disappointing, and I think the disappointment of the main event carries it all the way down to number 10 on my list. Number 9, UFC 315, Bilal Muhammad versus Jack Della Maddalena. Now, I don't think this was the worst, but I don't necessarily think it's better than a lot of the ones we'll be talking about. I think we had some pretty good pay-per-views overall this year. But when you go look at Muhammad versus Jack Della Maddalena, Benoit Saint-Denis versus Kyle Perpolek, honestly, it was a pretty lackluster first round, considering it was a Benoit Saint-Denis fight. And Kyle Perpolek isn't good. He's not good at MMA. And it seemed relatively competitive on the feet, which isn't a good look for Benoit Saint-Denis. And then he does that to Marisa Rufi. Shifts the tide of how everybody sees him. But Gets a good submission over Popolic. I think it was, it was like an okay fight. Grasso versus Silva was Natalia Silva looking quick. Grasso not being able to do anything. I don't really think it was that entertaining. Jose Aldo versus Zahabi carried it with how well Aldo did, the big moments, and that big third round. Valentina versus Fierro, I think, being very razor thin. Not necessarily the most entertaining fight in the world. I did think that Fierro 100% won that fight. And then Muhammad versus Jack Della Maddalene was actually a very good fight. So this is actually a pretty good pay-per-view. But if you go look at the ones ahead of it, I feel like we're going to have some more fun looking at them. Because as I go on to number 8, UFC 318 between Max Holloway and Dustin Poirier. The trilogy between the three. Between the two. This was an unbelievable fight. Starting off with the opener, Michael Johnson versus Daniel Zellhuber was okay. Zellhuber kind of froze. Michael Johnson ended up winning. Was a good feel-good moment. Pitbull versus Ige kind of slowed the place down, but Ige did crack Pitbull in that. And then you had Kevin Holland versus D-Rod, an unbelievable back-and-forth fight where Kevin Holland got cracked. His chin looked like it was hindering in that fight, and D-Rod ended up coming up with the win. Round 3, Kevin Holland looks like he's going to finish D-Rod. D-Rod prevails. D-Rod gets on top. Kevin Holland's blowing gas. An unbelievable back-and-forth fight. Kevin Holland loses the first 2 rounds and goes ballistic in round 3 and made it one of the better fights we've seen on the year. Paulo Costa with an unbelievable performance. Maybe not the greatest fight we've ever seen. Maybe not the most entertaining fight we've ever seen. But I think Paulo Costa looked beautifully clean. And I think it was a very nice breath of fresh air to see those kicks land, to see how clean he was with his combinations, to see him open up more with his confidence and beat Roman Kopylov in that fight. But then the Max Holloway versus Dustin Poirier fight was an instant classic. Every fight that these guys basically have is an instant classic. And you have them fight in their trilogy with Dustin Poirier's retirement fight with the BMF belt on the line. And it was just straight up instant classic. Max Holloway decimates Dustin Poirier. I don't know what 2 rounds one judge gave Dustin Poirier, but one of the better fights we've seen on the year. I think it could have been a fight of the year contender on some other years, but we've got a lot of those on this one. And one of them, in my opinion, the fight of the year, in my opinion, will be mentioned later on in one of the top pay-per-views of the year. But Max Holloway versus Dustin Poirier, I feel like carried this card big time. Kevin Holland versus D-Rod, one of the better fights we've seen as well. I feel like those two, with how good both of those fights were, it heavily carried this card. The other ones kind of weighted down. The Kosta Kopylov one wasn't the worst, but I do think it could put it up at number 8 for me here. At number 7, UFC 313, Alex Pereira versus Magomed Ankalaev 1. Alex Pereira, pretty lackluster performance against Ankalaev. Ankalaev hurt him in round 2. Rest of the fight was pretty boring. Really nothing entertaining in that fight, apart from that round 2 moment where Ankalaev almost knocked out Alex Pereira. Justin Gaethje versus Rafael Fiziev was a classic. I mean, it was literally like the first fight that they had. Entertaining, action-packed, very fun, good kickboxing. Gaethje looked good early. Then Fiziev wins the second round, and then you go on and Gaethje gets the third. Very, very entertaining fight overall. Jalen Turner gets submitted by Ignacio Bahamondes. Pretty sad the way it happened, but pretty fun, entertaining fight between the two for the 2.5 minutes that it lasted. Lemos versus Lucindo wasn't that great. It wasn't the worst, but it wasn't great. And Bobby Green versus Mauricio Rufy. Knockout of the year, Mauricio Rufy spinning kick in 2 minutes over Bobby Green. Flatlining him. The way he set it up, swinging his arms around, and kind of looked like it was flailing. And then just a beautiful, winding, spinning back kick. Straight across the head. Skidding over Bobby Green and knocking him out cold. Knockout of the year. On top of the Justin Gaethje versus Rafael Fiziev fight. And the Bahamondes versus Turner fight. You could even put the Poirier and Max Holloway trilogy over this one. I can kind of see it. But I think the knockout of the year definitely brings it up a little bit. The Gaethje Fiziev fight I loved a lot. And Turner Bahamondes I think was a really good finish for Bahamondes. So I put that one at number 7. At number 6, UFC 316, Merab Dvalishvili versus Sean O'Malley, the rematch. Merab Dvalishvili's performance against Sean O'Malley you really cannot undermine. There really is no way to put it into words to describe how good that performance was with Merab. Completely ran through Sean O'Malley. Made him look like he does not belong at the top whatsoever. Doesn't belong anywhere near Merab, that's for certain. And submits Sean O'Malley in round 3. I mean, it was literally one of the most dominating performances we've seen in a while. And a lot of people were saying O'Malley looked a lot better than he did in the first fight against Merab. He did not win a round against Merab in this fight. He won 2 against Merab in the first fight. I think O'Malley looked better injured in that first fight than he did in the second fight against Merab. The adjustments didn't look great. Should have been moving on the back foot. And Merab absolutely ran through him, and he made a dominant run through entertaining. Juliana Pena gets submitted by Kayla Harrison. Entertaining. Kimura was great. Pure domination. Kayla Harrison just showcased that she was better. Gastelum versus Pyfer. Pyfer hurts Gastelum big time. I think twice in the first round. Drops him. Gastelum prevails. Round 3 looks a little bit interesting. Gastelum wins round 3 for the most part. One judge gave him it. Looks like 1 or 2 judges gave him it. I don't even know. But I think that was a pretty decent fight, especially with the early moments Pyfer had. Bautista mixed sucked. And Kevin Holland finishing Vicente Luque. Fun fight. Good win for Kevin Holland. Good open for the card. And that is number 6 for me. On to the top 5. By the way, this video will be a little bit shorter than the rest. It won't be a 30-minute video. Not really much news. I mean, Dana White was losing his mind about the whole betting scandal thing. Little intermission here, by the way. But yeah, on to the top 5. On to the top 5. But that's why this video will be a little bit shorter this time. So probably going to end up being like a 15 to 20-minute video instead of a 30-minute. On to our top 5, as I say that for the third time. Top 5. Number 5. The number 5 pay-per-view. My number 5 ranked pay-per-view of 2025 is UFC 319. Dricus du Plessis versus Khamzat Chimaev. Now, I know a lot of people did not like this main event. But it was the most dominant performance you've seen, if not one of the most dominant performances at the bare minimum, in UFC history. Quite literally not a single thing Dricus du Plessis did across the entire 5 rounds, except maybe minimal success in the 5th, where he got 50-44 on all 3 scorecards. You probably could have given 2 to 3 10-8s on Khamzat Chimaev's behalf. Maybe even 4. Arguably 5. And du Plessis was playing defense the entire fight. He did not want to let go. He did not want to take risks. In my opinion, fear played a very big factor for Dricus du Plessis in this fight, and we got to see one of the most dominant performances in history. Chimaev made the defending champion look like he did not belong. Lerone Murphy and Carlos Prates, both gigantic spinning elbows back-to-back in the featured bout and the co-main event in 2 big fights, where Prates comes back off of that Ian Gary fight and the loss, and knocks out Jeff Neal for Jeff Neal's first ever knockout loss in the UFC at the buzzer of round 1 with an insane thudding spinning elbow. And Lerone Murphy, after getting, honestly, in my opinion, dominated in a high-pace matchup against Aaron Pico in the first 3 minutes of this fight, just constant grappling from Pico, good takedowns, beautiful body shots, pressure. Then Murphy timed him coming in with this beautiful spinning elbow and knocks Pico out cold, stiff. Co-main event, taking it on short notice. You then go to MVP versus Jared Cannonier. Had some pretty fun moments, but nothing crazy. And Tim Elliott submitting Kaya Sakura in the beginning of the fight was a weird fight. But Elliott submitting Asakura was very, very interesting to see. I think 4 finishes on this one. With the finishes that we had, or 3 finishes rather. One of the most dominant performances in UFC history in Chimaev dominating DDP. 2 of those finishes being those spinning elbows and a big upset by Tim Elliott to open the card. I think it was very entertaining overall. My number 5 pay-per-view on the year. Number 4. My number 4 ranked pay-per-view in 2025 so far. Ilia Topuria versus Charles Oliveira, UFC 317. We open up the card with Peyton Talbot versus Felipe Lima. Decent fight, nothing crazy. Darius versus Moicano. Again, decent fight, nothing crazy. But then you get into the final 3 fights. Fight of the year, Joshua Van versus Brandon Royval. Both guys, I believe, landed over 200 plus significant strikes if I'm not wrong. Yeah, 215 significant strikes for Brandon Royval, 204 for Joshua Van. Both Royval threw over 468 strikes in total. Joshua Van threw over 311. I mean, that's nearly 775 strikes. 779 total strikes thrown from both fighters combined. Joshua Van, big knockdown at the end. They did not stop for 3 straight rounds. Literally one of the most entertaining fights you'll ever see. Across 3 rounds, the most strikes ever thrown combined between the 2. First ever fight in a 3-rounder where 2 fighters land 200 plus significant strikes. It's one of the greatest fights of all time, and it was on the featured bout. And Joshua Van taking it on 3 weeks' notice in place of, I believe, Manel Kape at the time, where they tried to rebook Manel Kape versus Royval for, I think, the 2nd time. Now they're doing the 3rd time at a different main event. Van takes it in on 3 weeks' notice after fighting on a different pay-per-view and winning. Big step up for Joshua Van, beating the number one contender in flyweight in the fight of the year, one of the best fights we've ever seen, and getting himself a title shot against the guy who won the co-main event, Alexandre Pantoja, against Kai Kara France, where he literally made Kai Kara France look like an amateur, disposed of him like he was nothing, and submitted him in round 3. An absolutely dominant and Terminator-like performance from Alexandre Pantoja. And then you get to watch Ilia Topuria put on one of the most dominant performances we've seen. Yes, Charles Oliveira landed some pretty good elbows inside, good shots on Topuria overall. But Topuria had double underhooks by Oliveira against the cage. Reversed it, hip toss. Gets out of Oliveira's guard, one of the greatest jiu-jitsu practitioners you'll ever see in MMA history. The best guard, in my opinion, in MMA history. And we watched what Charles Oliveira did to Mateusz Gamrot. Makes this that much more impressive. Gets out of Oliveira's guard like butter. Passes to side control like it was nothing. Puts him in a crucifix. Scrambles out of a leg lock attempt from Oliveira. Gets up. Knocks him out stiff. I mean, just an unbelievable card overall, and everybody remembers the sensations they felt, especially with those final 3 fights. Cinema. My number 3. This is my top 3 ranked UFC fights. No, my top 3 ranked UFC main card pay-per-views in 2025. Number 3, UFC 314, Alexander Volkanovski versus Diego Lopez. We start this card with Dominic Reyes with an insane pull counter on Nikita Krylov, knocking him out cold bad. Dominic Reyes was a pretty good underdog. Dominic Reyes with a big knockout in round 1. Everybody was going crazy to start off the card. Gene Silva decimates Bryce Mitchell right after that. Beautiful stuff on the feet overall. Stops the grappling of Bryce Mitchell. Shuts down the doubts that even I had about Gene Silva's grappling. And submits Bryce Mitchell with an insane ninja choke. Yair Rodriguez dominating Patricio Pitbull across all 3 rounds. Hurting him, I think, in the 3rd round. Beautiful elbows landed at the end for Yair. I think it was relatively entertaining. Paddy Pimblett in the Michael Chandler fight. That was a pretty sick fight overall. And Paddy Pimblett with an insane finish over Michael Chandler. And I know a lot of people had Paddy Pimblett in the fight. But the fashion in which he beat Michael Chandler, I don't think anybody anticipated to that extent. And then you had one of the best fights of the year, capping off UFC 314, and Alexander Volkanovski versus Diego Lopez. Beautiful. Just beautiful stuff from Volkanovski and Lopez. Cinematic experience, looking at some of the shots we saw in that fight, with Volkanovski getting dropped in round 2, looking fantastic, turning back the clock, still looking faster than Lopez, even with Lopez knocking him down and hurting him. He got back up and fought through the chin allegations of Volkanovski. I mean, they're still kind of there, but he prevailed against a pretty hard hitter in Diego Lopez. And Volkanovski just looked fantastic in that and got his belt back. Number 3 in top pay-per-views of the year so far. At number 2, and honestly it was a surprise to me when I looked at this, but UFC 311, Makhachev versus Moicano. Now, you wouldn't think, because it was Renato Moicano not coming in on a day's notice, but instead of fighting Dariush, takes Arman Tsarukyan's place and fights Makhachev on a day's notice. But you look at the card. RDR literally just embarrasses Kevin Holland in 3.5 minutes and submits him. Kevin Holland doesn't belong at middleweight. RDR is a gigantic middleweight. Gets somebody down early that doesn't really have the best, not necessarily best defensive grappling, but Kevin Holland at 185 pounds against these really big 185ers that have fought at 205 gets submitted by RDR. Good performance from RDR. Jailton Almeida versus Sergey Spivak was actually, in my opinion, a pretty good back and forth in round 1, and Jailton Almeida ended up winning with some good ground and pound and some punches over Sergey Spivak in that fight. Another round 1 finish. Then you go to Yuri Prochazka versus Jamal Hill, an insane fight that you got across all 3 rounds. Yuri Prochazka looking fantastic. Jamal Hill having some really good moments in round 2, and then Yuri Prochazka finishing him in round 3. Another beautiful Yuri Prochazka round 3 knockout. Merab versus Umar, one of the more competitive fights and title fights we've seen across the year with actual entertaining aspects. Umar won the first 2 rounds, put the champion at big adversity, and Merab comes back. Merab entertains the crowd. He's taunting. He's having fun. He's stuffing Umar's takedowns. He's embarrassing Umar on these. He's getting Umar tired in round 4, it looks like. Umar prevails. Even though he took Merab down in round 3, Merab wins round 3 and 4. Now you have Merab and Umar tied 2-2. Very entertaining round 5. Big right hand from Merab. Taunting, looking good. Umar looks like he was resurging before that right hand from Merab, and Merab takes over. Merab wins at the end, rounds 3, 4, and 5. Very fun fight. One of the more competitive fights we've seen at bantamweight with Merab, in my opinion, the most competitive, which is why I do want to see that fight again. Just beautiful stuff from Merab overall in that fight, and Umar put on a very good performance. His first loss of his career, Merab defending in a very fantastic title fight, in which, by the way, he was a very big underdog, which we will never see again. And Islam Makhachev submitting Renato Moicano in round 1. Just a very good performance from Makhachev, dominant as you would expect. This card was a lot better than I genuinely ever reminded myself it was. I never remembered it was this good. And it's a lot better than I genuinely probably ever expected. But the number 1 UFC card of 2025, the number 1 UFC pay-per-view of 2025 is UFC 320, Magomed Ankalaev versus Alex Pereira 2. The rematch. Before we get into the biggest moment of the fight, of the card, we start off with Abus Magomedov getting some good success over Joe Pyfer in round 1, with Pyfer trying to wrestle. Pyfer with a big knockout in round 2. Very entertaining round 2 from Pyfer. Looked great in the or not a knockout, a submission. Hurts Abus Magomedov big time. Gets his back. I believe rear naked choke submission. And Joe Pyfer looked fantastic in that round 2. Josh Emmett gets completely decimated by Yusuf Zalal right after. Minute 38. Josh Emmett did not land or throw a single strike. Not a single strike landed in that fight. Zalal gets a beautiful takedown timed on Josh Emmett. Immediately submits him. Beautiful armbar by Yusuf Zalal. Emmett essentially rendered useless on the mat. Zalal showing levels. Emmett getting older. But also really no great jiu-jitsu in Josh Emmett's game. He's been submitted by Yair Rodriguez. I feel like Yusuf Zalal pretty easily broke down that tape. Then you go to one of the best comebacks of the year, all time. Yuri Prochazka versus Khalil Rountree. One of the greatest rounds you will ever see. Round 3, Yuri Prochazka versus Khalil Rountree. Do I really need to explain what happened in that? That just recently happened. Yuri Prochazka absolutely loses rounds 1 and 2. It doesn't look the greatest, looks a little slow, looks a little injured, and he was injured. And then he just runs through Khalil Rountree in round 3. Does not give him a single inch to breathe throughout the entire round. And finishes Khalil Rountree with an unbelievable combination, left hook to flatline Rountree. I cannot express the feelings I had watching Yuri Prochazka round 3. Co-main event, Merab Dvalishvili versus Corey Sandhagen. Merab almost knocks out Sandhagen. Sandhagen has a pretty decent round 1, as per usual expected with a Corey Sandhagen fight. He has it against a lot of these elite fighters. But then he just loses the rest of the rounds. He did it against Peter Yan when he fought Peter Yan. Merab was just better, the better grappler. Just constantly taking Sandhagen down over and over and over again. Shot 37 takedowns on Corey Sandhagen. 20 takedowns landed. Might be most in a title fight if I'm not wrong. And also threw 400 strikes. 265 significant landed, 114 of them. 243 strikes in total. Sandhagen said he was going to shoot on Merab. Didn't. Almost got knocked out. Merab just dominated him clear cut. And I think it was a pretty entertaining performance from Merab overall. Very active. Constantly shooting on Sandhagen. But it's just the activity is so impressive. And then round 1 knockout in the main event by Alex Pereira. Treating Magomed Ankalaev like a heavy bag. Ankalaev gets hit with a big right hand from Alex Pereira. Doesn't look comfortable whatsoever, and Pereira just knocks him out bad. The moment he lands that big right hand on Ankalaev, Ankalaev shoots. Labored shot. Lackluster. Pretty desperate. And Pereira just hammers the ground and pound until the fight gets stopped. Ankalaev gets relieved out of the fetal position. And just an unbelievable performance from Alex Pereira. UFC 320, Ankalaev versus Pereira 2 is 100% the best pay-per-view of the year so far. But trust me on this. Trust me on this. Maybe this will be a 30, where was I going with that? 32-minute episode, or a 30-minute episode. Because if I'm going to go look at what I anticipate with UFC 322 and UFC 323. UFC 322. Here's the main card. Benoit Saint-Denis versus Beneil Dariush. Leon Edwards versus Carlos Pratas. First of all, I think Benoit Saint-Denis is going to knock out Beneil Dariush. I think Carlos Pratas is going to knock out Leon Edwards. I think Sean Brady is either going to submit Michael Morales or Michael Morales is going to knock out Sean Brady. One or the other. Shevchenko versus Zhang Weili is relatively entertaining. I think stylistically it'll be a good matchup. I'm not going to be fair, I'm not going to expect too much out of a Valentina fight in 2025, but still fun, good stakes. I think if it's close, the suspense will give us enough entertainment out of it. And then Makhachev versus Jack Della Maddalena, there's no possible way that fight's bad. I think UFC 322 will be the best main card we have seen in 2025. No questions asked. I think it will beat UFC 320. And then if we go look at UFC 323, Cejudo versus Talbot. I think Talbot knocks out Cejudo. Moreno versus Tyra. I think that's a sick fight. I think Tyra wins. I don't necessarily remember the last time I watched a boring Brandon Moreno fight, so I have high hopes. Blachowicz versus Guskov could probably be pretty boring, in my opinion, so I'm not going to be too high on that. Alexandre Pantoja versus Joshua Van. That's a Pantoja submission. But if it's not, banger. But if it's a Pantoja submission, still a banger. And then Merab versus Peter Yan. I'm always going to have some entertainment with Merab. Always going to have entertainment with Peter Yan. I think that one could be in the top 3, depending on how some of these fights go. But UFC 322 is going to be the best main card we've seen. Maybe not a 30-minute video. I think that's it. But yeah, appreciate you guys for watching. Just a little bit under 30 minutes this time. We'll see you guys again tomorrow morning. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Let me know what you guys agree and disagree with on what I've listed as my top 11. I will start incorporating graphics and, like, honestly, just show what I'm seeing on the background. Like, maybe if I have, like, something open up on Chrome, I'll show you guys the screen as well. Couple of things I'll add to the YouTube, but it'll get there eventually. Not necessarily yet, but it'll get there eventually. I appreciate all you guys for being here. I will see you guys again tomorrow morning. Peace out.